Chapter 14. Death. A week after Marius took up his 7th consulship, he was dead. It was 86 BC, and Rome was in crisis. Civil war raged across the Italian peninsula, and now their leader, the great General Gaius Marius, was dead. Or how did this happen? How did Marius die only days into his 7th consulship? And what was so significant about that? Why do we even care? Was it really so bad if one old guy died? Well, yes, actually, it was. For reasons we'll explore right now on this channel. When news of Marius's death reached Rome, people had 3 immediate reactions. They were afraid, they were relieved, and they were in awe. Let's start with fear, because that's pretty easy to understand. If anyone could bring Rome to its knees, it was Marius. Even in his 70s, he was the greatest general Rome had ever seen. He had defeated the Cimbri and the Teutones, and he had reformed Rome's military from a volunteer militia force into a standing army. That wasn't exactly subtle or popular at the time, but the results were undeniable. And besides all that, he was still the most popular Roman politician around. So who would take his place? Who would lead Rome now? Would civil war consume them all? People were afraid, but also relieved, because honestly, there was a lot of opposition to Marius these days. He was a polarizing figure, both within the political elite and amongst the Roman populace. Many thought he was a dangerous tyrant who would trample the Republic underfoot. Many others respected him for his achievements, his military victories, and his social reforms made him a hero of the common people. And the common people were the base of his power. But Marius was aware that his position was precarious. That's why he chose Cinna, his ally and close friend, as his heir apparent. Marius had adopted Cinna, taking him into his own household and legally making him his son. In doing so, Marius made Cinna a member of the Marian gens, which made Cinna eligible to become consul. And that's exactly what happened. While Marius was busy subduing revolts in Africa, Cinna became consul for 84 BC. But when Marius came back to Rome in 84, he wanted to be consul again himself. The two argued over it, and it looked like Marius had won, at least for now. But that doesn't mean Marius was safe, for his enemies now controlled the government, and they weren't going to let Marius get away with this. He had too much blood on his hands, too many enemies. Now, those enemies included not just fellow politicians, but also Marius's former allies and subordinates. When news of Marius's death reached Sulla, he was in Asia Minor, and he didn't know what to think. On the one hand, Marius was his rival and a thorn in his side for nearly 2 decades. On the other hand, they were once friends and allies. They had fought together against the Italians and the Gauls. And besides all that, Marius was older than Sulla and near the end of his life. Did Sulla feel anything when he heard about Marius's death? Maybe, but he was careful not to show it. Instead, he mourned another general, Gaius Flavius Fimbria, who died in that same revolt in Africa that brought Marius back to Rome. Fimbria was another brilliant general, who might have been his greatest military mind if not for Marius and Sulla. Fimbria was killed by sword while fighting in Numidia, but the swords that slew him were wielded by the very people who Marius and Fimbria had helped raise to power. King Jugurtha of Numidia hired some freed slaves from Rome, armed them with swords, and had them storm Fimbria's camp. According to Plutarch, the swords were so sharp and so numerous that no shield or armor could hold them off. Fimbria was killed trying to protect his baggage train. Sulla loved that story, and when he heard about Fimbria's death, he took out an augur's book and wrote a prophecy about it. This is what it said: "Thus ends a great man's life, not by fortune of arms or treachery, but by the negligence of those who are his own." It was a thinly veiled warning to the men who put him in charge of Marius's unfinished business. Don't think I didn't notice what happened to Fimbria. Sulla, just like everyone else in Rome, was afraid. But he knew that fear wouldn't help him. The best thing he could do was to secure his position in Rome and set his sights on Marius's adopted son, Cinna. The first order of business was to get his brother back from exile. Lucius Cornelius Sulla had gone into self-imposed exile in 91, after he and Marius clashed over land reform. Sulla was a supporter of the Optimates, the political elite who dominated Roman politics for centuries. The 88 Lucius was living in the city of Athens and running a casino. But now Sulla called him back to Rome to serve as his lieutenant in the coming conflict. Once Lucius arrived in Rome, he started securing their power base, amassing weapons, hiring mercenaries, and buying off influential people. But their actions didn't go unnoticed. Cinna was suspicious of Sulla and his motives, but he couldn't prove any wrongdoing, so he hesitated to act. All the while, Rome was being torn apart by civil war. From across the Italian peninsula, veteran soldiers were returning home, but instead of disbanding them, Sulla used them to bolster his personal army. Most of these soldiers were loyal to Marius, but some followed Sulla because they respected his ability as a general and because they despised the reforms Marius championed. Whatever their motivations, the result was clear. Rome was becoming a garrison state, and before long, the streets would run red with the blood of Romans. As tension increased between Sulla and Cinna, it became clear that a compromise was impossible. So Cinna left Rome with an army and established a base of operations in the south. Sulla was forced to do the same, moving to the city of Pisa. There, he raised more troops, specifically 3 legions made up entirely of freed slaves. These 3 legions would become the most important military force in Rome. Under Sulla's command, they fought through central Italy, defeating the Marian forces and forcing Cinna to flee to Egypt. But that was just the beginning, because now Sulla turned his attention to the eastern and there his fortunes took a turn. Despite having the backing of Rome's elites, Sulla struggled against the armies of King Mithridates, the 6th of Pontus. Rome's legions were a shadow of their former selves. They lacked supplies, logistics, and coordination. And somehow, despite his reputation as a brilliant commander, Sulla lost battle after battle against Mithridates. The turning point came when a Roman envoy arrived in Athens carrying orders from Cinna. These orders were simple: recall your legions immediately. Sulla didn't have enough power to fight Mithridates without the support of Rome, so he had to choose between his ambitions and his life. He chose neither. Instead, he seized the envoy and executed him, seizing his legions in the process. Sulla may have broken Roman law by killing an envoy, but that was the last thing on his mind. He was going to seize control of Rome, whether Cinna liked it or not. What followed was one of the bloodiest chapters in Roman history. Sulla marched his legions west, devastating the countryside, sacking cities and murdering thousands of civilians. Everywhere he went, he left behind a legacy of terror and bloodshed. But eventually he arrived in Rome, and it was as if the gods themselves had parted the waters for him. All resistance crumbled before him. He took Cinna's prescriptions off the walls, arrested his supporters, confiscated their property, and sent them into exile. Some of Cinna's allies tried to flee Rome, but Sulla blocked their path, either killing them outright or forcing them into exile. The 82 Sulla was undisputed master of Rome, and his ambitions were far from over. But first, he needed to address the issue of kings. Italy might be under his control, but Rome was still locked in a bitter struggle against Mithridates. In fact, the war was worse than ever, because now the eastern provinces were arming themselves against Rome. Luckily for Sulla, he had a solution to this problem, and that solution was to create more kings. Tobit Akin Sulla reasoned, "You need to be king yourself." So he marched his legions east, bypassing Greece, where most of the fighting was happening. Instead, he headed south to Egypt and forcibly made Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy the kings and queens of a newly independent Egypt. From there, Sulla marched north to the Levant, where he repeated the process. First, he deposed King Aristarchus and made himself king of Syria. Then he did the same for King Alexander and his sister Bernice. Alexander's title, by the way, was pretty great. He was the king of the Hellenistic kingdom of Bithynia and Pontus. Sulla took all of that and condensed it down to one word: Bithynia. Now, the real reason he did this was to reassert Rome's dominance over the eastern Mediterranean. By installing puppet kings, Sulla could exert direct control over these kingdoms without having to occupy them. With that threat neutralized, he returned to Athens and prepared to crush Mithridates once and for all. Over the next few years, Sulla waged total war against Pontus. He laid siege to its cities, murdered its inhabitants, and crushed its armies. But even that wasn't enough. He wanted to conquer Anatolia, and in doing so, Sulla ended Rome's golden age forever. To hear how, stay tuned for more. Chapter 14. Death in Chapter 15. Tyranny will explore the collapse of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. Check it out here on this channel. Thanks for watching.